Begin the current Daf, Mesech Kesuvos Daf Kutov, 8 lines down at the top of the Yomim, where the Gemara just finishes off a related discussion we had mentioned in the previous Daf, a pasuk with Elisha. We spoke about the idea about Sheikhad, talking about that one of the stories that he told him, I just want you to take the gift, don't worry, I don't want you to judge my case, because like we find by Elisha, that he was given bikurim. He says, did he eat bikurim? No, it tells you that whoever brings a doirin, a gift, it's like as if he brought bikurim. That's why I want you to take it. And the Gemara, once it introduced the pasuk with Elisha, is going to bring the pasuk right after that in an unrelated discussion. Something that's discussed in today's daf are machzah shekel. Machzah shekel is every single year, every Jew had to give a half of a shekel. And from those shkolim, they were put into this lishka. Now, the trumas lishka with a separated shkolim, which that's the Brisa says, the ketoves, or kaban the sibur, they all came from the trumas halishka. Now, the meisa truma was after that the year expired, so the remainder of the trumas halishka, that's disqualified for kabanas. And then our Gemara discusses what they actually used the meisa truma for. Now, there's the shiur halishka, the shkolim that remained in the lishka after the trumas halishka. Meaning to say that they would take off boxes. They had this huge chamber full of coins, and the truma would be 3 boxes 3 times a year. Now, is what remained in those boxes, and then what remained in the chamber, and that the Brisa says was used for the walls of the city, the towers, all the tzarchir. That came from the shiur halishka. Then that's from the shiur halishka itself. Then there's the meisu shiur halishka, meaning besides there's shiur halishka, what's left over that wasn't taken the truma. And then there's the meiser of that, meaning after you use all the tzarchir, what'd you do with those coins? You already took care of all the upkeep. That's what is called meiser haperes. According to Rabbi Shloimy, they would take those extra funds and they would do business. They would buy and sell supplies from which hektish would profit. That's what the meiser shiur halishka was, related to the idea of meiser haperes. Now, then there's bedek habayis, which is a totally different fund. That's for the structural maintenance of the Beis Hamikdash. So that a Brisa brings the Mizbeach ha'olah and the Leshachas, the Azaras, the structural entities in the Beis Hamikdash, they would come from the Kachah Bedek Habayis. And the Meiser Bedek Habayis, the money left over for the maintenance fund, that's called the Meiser Bedek Habayis, what you did with that. Then there's Meiser Nesachim. Now, what are Meiser Nesachim? What's the leftover of the libations? So some say it's what's called Beirut Midas. What does that mean? So the suppliers for the Beis Hamikdash, they would be moedim amina muvuretzes, meaning when you had to give to the Beis Hamikdash, you're selling your customers the Beis Hamikdash, you had to give an overflowing measurement. Now the makrivan would be meichid, meaning that when you sacrificed it, you would smooth it out, flatten it out. So there's an excess over here every time it's being delivered in the nesachim. That's the meiser nesachim. Others say it's yukra bezula. What does that mean? Regarding price, not regarding measurement. So kibul be'arba sharkim mishalosh. Let's say you make up a price with hektish. What's the going market value? You make up with the gizber, and it's okay. It's going for 4 saw a seller. Then the price goes up. Now it's 3 saw a seller. So the seller could be making a lot more money. No, masapik be'arba. He has to give according to the original made up price for the cheaper price at 4 seller. Same thing is the other way around. Kibul b'shalosh for huzlam arba. Let's say he was selling the 3 saw a seller. Then the price went down. He has to be Masapik Ba'arba. So there's always going to be there's going to be this differentiation, oftentimes, that's Meiser, that there's now excess that hektish is making. That's called Meiser Nesachim. That our Gemara discussed also what we do with that. Kaitza Mizbeach is that when this Mizbeach was idle, because of no kabbanas, then they would bring this dessert or and the edges, whatever, but they would bring these kabbanas from certain funds. So begin the current Daf, Daf Kovav, 8 lines down to the top of the Yomim. We're just finishing off a related discussion from a pasuk in Elisha. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosef, in the years of Rabbi Yosef, there was an anger from Hashem, and there was a famine in the world. So I'm only going to Rabbi Yosef. The rabbi said to Rabbi Yosef, "L'boy ma'arachme, beseech mercy, daven." So Amalu said to them, "Hashdu ma'alisha, if we find Elisha." And the Rabbanim mifterim mekamei, when the rabbis would leave from him to stand up in the Beis Hamikdash. The Paishi, it would remain by him those who would eat by his table. Today, often the Muslim Rabbanan, 2,200 rabbis, and yet be Eden Rizcha, that time of anger, he wouldn't beseech mercy. Anoi, boy, rachme, I'm going to beseech mercy. I didn't have close to the amount of people that he had to take care of, and he didn't beseech mercy. I'm going to beseech mercy. And says Gemara, where do we know that he had so many people remaining by him that he had to take care of? Elisha. Because it says a pasuk in Malachim Beis. The pasuk there says that there were those who ate by his table were. It says that there was 20 breads and lechem bikurim, which is 21, and carmel. And that's where we talk about the bikurim we spoke about. That was the pasuk we spoke about at the end of the previous Daf. And the caramel, which is the plump grains, that's 22. And it says, his attendant said to him, what am I going to give this in front of 100 people? So the question is, what does it mean, am I going to give these 22 breads in front of 100 people? If he was saying, I'm going to give 22 breads for 100 people, in a famine year, that's a lot. That definitely should be enough to give 22 breads for 100 people. Ella rather, no, says the Gemara, what he meant to say was, every one of these 22 breads, kamei meya ish. I have to give that for 100 people. Now, that's very simple math. That gives you to 2,200. So you see that even though he had so many people to feed, he didn't beseech mercy. I don't have even close to that. Am I going to be boi rachmi? Now, the Gemara tells us, once we mentioned this idea about when the rabbis would leave, how many students would be left over. When the rabbis would leave from the yeshiva of Rav, have a paishi alpha masin rabbanim. They'd be left over with 1,200 rabbis. Maybe Rav Huna from the yeshiva of Huna. Have a paishi tamni made rabbanim. They would be left over with 800 rabbis. Rav Huna have a darish b'tlei samaroi. And again, talking about how many that they had in their care, in their yeshivas. Rav Huna have a darish b'tlei samaroi. He would darshan with 13 amplifiers, meaning that he needed to have everyone in his yeshiva here, but he was in like somewhere in the middle, and he had people in the front, people in the back, people on the sides. So he had so many people to amplify. He didn't have the mic that I have. After as a simple say to have a mic, he had 13 amaroi to amplify his voice. That means to say how many students he had. Going back to that idea, when the rabbis would get up from the yeshiva of Huna, and they would just shake off their garments, have a salik avka, there would be so much dust that would rise, and it would like darken the sun, and it was so recognizable even in Eretz Yisrael, all the way from Bavel. They would say in the West, they got up from the Mesivta of Rav Huna, the Babylonian. That's how much dust would come up from the people sitting down there on the floor in the yeshiva of Huna. When the yeshiva students, they would leave from the yeshiva of Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, they would be left with 400 rabbanim. They call themselves the orphans. Name is very little compared to the previous days. When the rabbis would leave from the yeshiva of Abaya, we left just with 200 rabbis. They call themselves the orphans of the orphans. It was getting less and less the people that were remaining when everyone would get up from the yeshiva. Now going back to the theme of the previous daf regarding, we spoke about the Trumas Halishka. So not because we spoke about those that are the judges that we pay them from the Trumas Halishka. So Amar Yitzchak Baradifa, Amar Rabami. Says others that were also got just like Gezer Shabishalaim, that was the opening of this the parak that we spoke about. So it said they got 99 mana from Trumas Halishka. So the Gemara mentions others that were paid from Trumas Halishka. It says that Mevakri Mumin Shabi Yerushalayim, those that would check the blemishes of the animals in Yerushalayim, which is obviously also related to the karbanas, which is what the Trumas Halishka was used for. So they would take their wages from the Trumas Halishka. I'm going to read it Mishmol. It says, the Talmudic scholars that would teach the halachas of shchita to the kahanim, also obviously related to the karbanas. So they would take their wages from the Trumas Halishka, which is again what was taken off from the lishka, which is used for the karbanas. They got their wages from there too. I'm not giving one now. It says also very difficult avodah They would teach the halacha to take a fistful of the flour for the kalim. To take the weight from Trumas Alishka. He adds on an unrelated one. He says that those that would edit the Svarim, the Sifrei Torah, in Yerushalayim, as Rashi explains, of every single individual, because you're not allowed to hold on to a sefer that's not edited. As the pasuk says, "Al tishka malecha avla," you not allowed to have such a something that's flawed in your home. Now, as Rashi points out, Ro Bezdin, the court saw Shoyim Atzim Davar. The people were lazy about this. So, although it's not really meant for this, it's meant only for Kabbanas, they made it that it was permitted to be used, and therefore, those editors would take the weight from Trumas Alishka, unrelated to the fact it's not nothing to do with Kabbanas, they just needed some source to pay for people's Sifrei Svarim to be edited. Another teacher, Amr Nachman Rav, so he says, well, it's not necessarily another teaching, and specifically it's Rav Nachman in the name of Rav. He says, because he's going to disagree, the women who they would weave the curtains, Rav Nachman says that Rav said they would take the wage of the Trumas Alishka. The Yomir says Rav Nachman, I say, no, because it was from the temple upkeep treasury. And the curtains were in the place of the structure, so therefore it would come from the Bedek Bayis. Why would it come from Trumas Alishka? However, Meisver the Gemara asks on Rav Nachman actually from a Brisa. Brisa actually supports Rav. Brisa says Noshma argues by Perechis, the women that would weave the curtains, and the Beis Garma Meisver Lechem Apan, that was the family that was in charge of the Lechem Apan, the showbreads. Beis Avdina Samai Sekretarius. Those families, the Gemara says, women of Ches would be in charge of their. They would be in charge of the Ketuvos. So Kulam Ayinetlis Scharim and Trumas Alishka. They all took their wages from the Trumas Alishka. So you see, like Rav, that actually came from the Trumas Alishka, not from the Bedek Bayis. So says the Gemara, it's not difficult. Hasam b'devavi. There, those curtains were opposite entryways that were made for the purposes of tznius, just to be discreet. It wasn't in place of structure. So therefore, yes, it came from the Trumas Alishka. It wasn't a structural entity. But anything that was necessary for the structure, for example, curtains that separated between the Heichel and the Kachar Kadishim, because in the second Beis Hamikdash, although in the first Beis Hamikdash the Shlomo Melech made, he made what's called a traxin. A traxin was this doorway that was a wall separating the first bit, the Heichel from the Kachar Kadishim. Now, when they came back to make the second Beis Hamikdash, they made the Heichel much higher. Now, that structure could not maintain a thickness of an amma with such a tall height. Now, the thing is, they couldn't widen that wall either, because then they would be narrowing either the Heichel or the Kachar Kadishim. So what did they do? They made two curtains, and a gap between them of an amma, as the Gemara says, Nimad of an alpha amma base. So that was like blocking the area. It just couldn't be a wall. So those parreiches were made from Kachar Bedek Bayis because they were part of the structure. It wasn't for the tznius purposes, part of the structure. The Gemara says, there was 13 curtains in the second Beis Hamikdash. Shiva keneged Shiva Sha'arim. 7 was correlating to the 7 gates of the Azara, of the courtyard. One was for the opening of the Heichel. One was for the opening of the antechamber. Beis B'dvir, there's 2 that were in place of the Amatraxin, between the Heichel and the Kachar Kadishim. And Beis Kenegdim Aliyah, 2 in the same area, just on the higher, in the upper story, to separate between the upper story of the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodeshim, which was again also in place of the Amatraxin, a higher ceiling that they had curtains there too. So again, depending which curtains it was, and says the Gemara, it's not a contradiction if it's in place of a structure like by the Devir between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadosh, that was going to come from the Kachar Bedek Bayis, but the other ones that were for Tznius Ba'alma, that's going to come from the Trumas Alishka. So the continues the Gemara. Turn up on Nashim HaMegalis B'nei Lapara. What was interesting was what they did was they had these courtyards built on bedrock in Yerushalayim, which beneath that there was actually a halal, like a cavity, a space in the ground. Why did they do that? Because of what's called kever tahim. Kever tahim is we don't know. There might be somewhere deep down someone buried, as the Mishnah teaches in Parah in the third parak. So as the Gemara tells us in Sukkot of Chafaf Manalef, they would bring pregnant women to this area where we know for sure there's no problem about kever tahim because there's bedrock and there's halal beneath it, so it would be a gap if there's even anything beneath that. And these pregnant women would give birth over there, and they would bring up their children over there in this commune, and for the purposes of the Parah Aduma, to be engaged in the burning of the Parah Aduma and filling up the waters, and to spray the Kohen, who would spray the Parah Aduma for 7 days, as the Gemara says in Yom Daf. Why they make such a far extreme level of purity to have these kids born in the place of Kahava and to remain there for their whole time was for one reason, was because they were mezalzel, they were disgraceful a little bit regarding the tahara of the paraduma because it specifically had to be a tful yom. As the Mishnah teaches, they made the kohen who would burn the paraduma Tomei that day. They would toivel him. Why? Because the tzedukkim said it had to be that he had Harav Shemesh, which normally for tahara purposes you have to have sundown, and the Chum disagreed. The Dafka wanted to make him into a tful yom. So he made him toivel, and they would go ahead and burn the paraduma. For that reason, they made these kids who never in their life ever had a possibility of becoming tummy to then go ahead and draw the water and spray the kohen, all because of that one reason. So those women, obviously we're talking about our whole families have to be there in these places, so who would pay for these women that would bring up kids to be engaged in the paraduma? So says the Talmud Kama, they took their wages from the Trumas Alishka, because obviously related to the avodah of karbanis. On some level, the paraduma is a chatas. Rabbi Shloimy, he says no. Nashim Yikaris, they were wealthy women. Should be Shloimy, and they would feed them, and they would provide for their clothing and for their garments. Also, I wouldn't ask from rabbis, we tend them base. Klisharis. What's the halacha with the service vessels that they would utilize in the mizbeach achitza, the outer mizbeach, the one in the chatzar, which was a structure made out of stone? What's the halacha? Would you make those klisharis from the funds of the bedek habayis? What's the question? So the Gemara explains. On the one hand, you say tzarech mizbeach. They service the mizbeach achitza, which is bedek habayis. It's a structure. And therefore you would bring the klisharis from the temple upkeep funds. No, like so the carbon, on the other hand, you could say klisharis is there to serve for the carbon that's sacrificed on Mizbeach. Oh, therefore, and therefore it would come from the leftovers of the Trumas Alishka. So which one is it? Do we see it secondary to the Mizbeach or secondary to the carbons that are brought in the Mizbeach? So Amalei said to him, it only comes from the leftovers. It's not really the Trumas Alishka itself, it would be the leftovers essentially from the Trumas Alishka. That's where you go ahead and bring the klisharis from. However, the Gemara says Eisvei. The Gemara asks on them from the Braisa, from the pasuk in Dibur Yomim. It's a pasuk in Dibur Yomim based. What does the pasuk say? It says Ucha Chaloisam. When they finished being mechazik, strengthening the bedek habayis, they needed funds for the temple upkeep in the days of Yehoyash. So it says, they brought up under the king in Yehoyada, Ishar HaKesef, the rest of the monies, Yaseu Kelim Beis Hashem, and they made it for vessels to the house of Hashem, Klisharis, Begomer, service vessels, and etc. So you see that the Klisharis were coming from the bedek habayis, not like Rav, who said that it is from the Trumas Alishka. So Amalei said to him, so he said back to him, whoever taught you Ksuvim, which is the Beyamim, it didn't teach you Navi, which comes before him. It's the Pasuk Melachim Beis. Pasuk says, however, we're not going to make the Beis Hashem, the temple upkeep, into Kalim, Begoim, etc. No, Kilo Eisam Alochi Yitnu. The bedek habayis is only going to be for those who do the work. So you see that the bedek habayis is not for sipos, which means kalim. So you see, like Rav is correct from Chuvas Alishka, but then the problem is Yachikasha Kra Dadi. You seem to have a contradiction in the pasuk in Kesuvim and the pasuk in Navi. Says Gemara Kash is not difficult. It depends. Kan, the pasuk in Divrei Yomim, that seems to indicate that it's from the Bedek Abayas, is Shagavu. They collected the funds for the purposes of Bedek Abayas. Voisiru. Now they have leftovers. They don't need it all. So then they're going to take from the leftovers and make Klei Shabbos. But Kan, the pasuk in Malachim that Rabbah is proving his point, or Shagavu, lo yisiru. If they collect, there's no extra. If there's no extra, then no, you're not taking the Klei Shabbos from the Bedek Abayas. You're going to take it from the Trumas Halishka, the way Rav said. And the problem is, says the Gemara, on this answer, but this day you tell me that they collected and they have left it, but my hava. But I mean, but you're telling me that be'etzim, the truth is that Klei Shabbos are supposed to come from Trumas Halishka, and you tell me, but if there's leftovers, that's how you be miyashav the pasuk. Leftovers, but it wasn't sanctified. They collected for the kedusha of carbon. They collected for the temple upkeep. If you tell me Klei Shabbos is supposed to come from kedushas of carbon from Trumas Halishka, how could you take leftovers for a different fund? Says the Gemara, well-known concept. Says leiv bezdin nasar aleim. The courts, their intentions are stipulated. If they need it. From love, yehei l'Klei Shabbos. You're right. It was collected for the temple upkeep. But if they don't need it, they can use it for something else that they need it for, which would be for the Klei Shabbos. Now, Rabbi Shmuel is taught in yeshiva, in the Brayse Yeshiva, Rabbi Shmuel, like Rav, that Klei Shabbos, boim Trumas Halishka, the service vessels come from the leftovers of the Trumas Halishka. Shema. He brings the pasuk we mentioned before, and the way he darshans it is specific. It says there in the pasuk, when they finished, they brought it unto the king Yoda, a shar hakesef. What does it mean, shar hakesef? Ezeu kesef sheshli shirai. What type of monies have leftovers? In other words, it's really a new way of interpreting. We had asked the Shaila on Rav. He said that the Klei Shabbos come from the Trumas Halishka. So the Gemara asked the question from a pasuk in Dibur Yomi. The pasuk says that when they finished collecting for the Bedek Abayis, they used the leftovers for Klei Shabbos. So he says, no, you're reading the pasuk wrong. Eshar HaKesef doesn't mean the leftover funds of the Bedek Abayis they collected for. He says, Ezeu Kesef Sheshli Shirayim. What's the money from that has leftovers? There's monies from the boxes, the kupais, which were separated from the lishka, and the shirayim remain in the lishka. Have a image at Trumas Halishka. The monies in the boxes, those are monies that have leftovers. So to the contrary, he says that pasuk that we thought was asking on Rav, that was the leftovers we thought from the Bedek Abayis, which the context of the psukim there is talking about, says no. The pasuk is telling you clearly that where do you get the Klei Shabbos from? It's from a place that there's monies that have shirayim be'etzim. What is that? That's the Trumas Halishka. Truma is taking off from the chamber. You're going to have leftovers. So from the boxes is actually where you see explicitly, not like, it's not a question of Rav, it's the contrary, it's actually supporting Rav. It's saying it's coming from the Trumas Halishka. It says, how do you know it comes from the Trumas Halishka that has shirayim? Famous shirayim gufayu. Maybe it's telling you that from the leftovers that remain in the chamber, that's where the Klei Shabbos come from, not from the Truma itself. It says shiur, from the Eshar HaKesef. So how do you know that it's from that which makes shirayim and not from the shirayim itself? How do you know it's come from the Trumas Halishka, not from the lishka? Says Gemara no that we know kedama Rava. Like Rava says, how do you know nothing's supposed to be brought on the fires of the Mizbeach before the Tamid Shashachar, the morning Korban Tamid? It says there in the pasuk, "Va'arich Allah ha'olam," that you can organize on the Mizbeach the olam. We asked, what does that teach? How do you see nothing's supposed to come before the Tamid Shashachar, that olam? So Rava says, because ha'olam sounds like olam rishayna. The olam is the one that's mentioned first in the order of the karbanas. And that's the oila sabayka, like it says, "V'martlam zeu isha." The hay, extra hay, is what we're darshing. Says the Amar, so hachanami here also, when we're saying Eshar HaKesef, HaKesef indicates that we're talking about monies that have something that comes after it, because it's Kesef Rishon. Ha'oila, the oila tells us the first oila. HaKesef is the first Kesef, And that's how we know that it's not the shiraim itself, but it's that which makes shiraim, it's the first monies. But basically, the Gemara asks on Rav from the following brisa. The brisa says, "Hakatoides, b'chol kabbanas tzibur, and all the kabbanas of the tzibur, boy mitrumas alishka." So that's obvious because that's the kabbanas. That's what the trumas alishka was for. Mizbeach hazav, on the other hand, called the mizbeach, which Rashi points out, the inner mizbeach in the kodesh kodeshim was in the heichel was a kli, wasn't a structure. It wasn't attached to the ground. You could move it. So therefore, it's judged like a kli. So it's going to be like the kli shabbos. Well, the vaina, the frankincense of the lechel aponim, ukli, which wasn't seemingly as a regular carbon, ukli shabbos and the service vessels, boim imaisin nesachim. Those would come from the leftover of the nesachim. Now, as we mentioned in the introduction, Rashi mentions over here, it's machlekes and menachos of tzadi, what the maisin nesachim was. Here, Bar Yosef says it's beirutze midas. What do you mean the excess of the measurements? Because someone who provide flour, let's say the distributor, so he would get money from Hektish to provide flour the whole year to the Beis Hamikdash, big customer. So they would measure to Hektish in a overflowing measurement, not even. Now, whoever's sacrificing would smooth it out, the measurement. Now there would be these leftover nesachim. They would sell that. That's considered the mush nesachim. Rabbi Yochanan, however, says a different interpretation. It's just that we learned that if someone accepts upon himself to provide all the year to hektish flour, let's say they made up a price of 4 saw a seller, but then the price went up, 3 saw a seller, inflation. So he still has to provide for the old price of 4 saw a seller. And the other way, let's say he made up a price of 3 saw a seller, and then the price went down. Now it's 4 saw a seller. He has to provide the lower price of 4, and therefore that's mois nesachim. That's where it goes to the kais mizbeach. That's what's called mois nesachim, because there's going to be that money that Hektish is making off of this. Now mizbeach ha'oila, which is a structure, that's the outer mizbeach, or halashach is the chambers, bazaars, and the courtyards. So those are all boim mekach b'degabayis. Those come from the kach b'degabayis because that's the temple upkeep. Chutz l'chemes azar, if it's outside of the walls of the azar, for example, the Ezes Nashim, the Chayil, the Chemes Seir, Migdal, those are all beyond the Azara. What we call the Azara is the Ezes Yisrael. Ezes Nashim is further out. All those things are by shiur halashachos. Those come from the leftovers of the chambers. Meaning, when you took off truma in boxes, then you have what remains in the chamber. That's from the shiur halashachos. That's what that's from. And this is what we learn. This is Masechet the skull. Chemes Seir u'Migdal. The walls of the city and its towers, all the needs of the city, those come from the left of the lishka. Okay, that was a long brisa. But the point of the question was, one of the first cases was that klei sharis comes from moiser nesachim, which again, we had 2 different interpretations of what moiser nesachim is, but that's a difficulty on Rav. Because Rav said the klei sharis come from trumas alishka, and the brisa says that it comes from the moiser nesachim. Says the Gemara, it's not a difficulty, tanoi. It's a machlokes tanoi. There is an opinion that says chisharos come from the trumas alishka the way Rav says, which is that within Mishnah Masechet Shkalim. Mishnah says moiseh truma, the leftover of the truma, meaning again they took off in boxes, 3 boxes. When it comes Rosh Chodesh Nisan, whatever's left over in the boxes, from this point onwards, you could only buy the karbanos tzibur from the new truma. As the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah Zayin, karbanos tzibur that come on the 1st of Nisan, it's a mitzvah bringing from the new shkal. Now, what do you do with the boxes that you still have shkal that you took off in the truma? So that's called ma'isa truma. Says the Mishnah Mahay Oisim. But what do they do with that leftover funds? So the ku'ei zav, they would make these sheets of gold, tzipah the base kachah kachim, to plate the holies of the holies. They would plate it with these sheets of the floor and the wall with gold. Shmuel, he says that Moiseh Pedis, the leftover of the produce, which the Gemara is going to explain later on what this is, that would go to Kaitz HaMizbeach, which is what? When the Mizbeach was not being utilized from the Dharm and the Davos, they would take from this fund of Moiseh Pedis, and they would buy Karbanos Oilus, and they would sacrifice the meat on the Mizbeach, and the skins would go to the Kahana. Moisa Truma, again, this is all different things, but this is the main point that we're bringing. The Moisa Truma was Likli Sharis. You see, like Rav, that the Kli Sharis came from the Moisa of the Truma. That's why we kept on saying when we say Truma Salishka, it meant the Moisa of the Truma, not really the Truma Salishka itself, but whatever's left over from the Truma Salishka after all the Ketaydas and the Karbanas, then that extra funds in from the Truma Salishka, that was used for. So although we do have an opinion not like Rav, that it came from the Moisa Nesachim, but we see that there are Tanaim like him. Kivam, he says Moisa Truma, he says not like Rav. He said, or at least he says at least part of it. The Moisa Truma says L'kais Mizbeach was for this dessert of the Mizbeach. When the Mizbeach wasn't being utilized, they took the extra funds in the Truma, which actually makes sense. That was meant for the Karbanas. So when the Mizbeach was not being used, it would bring those extra Karbanas idols. Moisa Nesachim, that was Likli Sharis. That was like the price we brought before. It says not like Rav. That the extraness from the LEDs Nesachim, whatever that means, the measurements or the price, would be used with Kli Sharis. He said, Moisa Nesachim was the Kaitza Mizbeach. So he says the inverse of Rabbi Kiva. And Moisa Truma was the Kli Sharis. Now, says the Braisa, says the Mishnah, they didn't agree that there is even such a concept of Moiser by Paris. Because the first opinion, Rabbi Shmuel said, Moiser Paris, what do you do with the excess Paris, which we can explain right now? What is that? What do you use it for? He says, let's go to the Kaitz on his bath. If you notice, Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Chanina both didn't mention anything about Moiser Paris. Why not? Because they didn't agree to this whole concept. As the Gemara explains, Paris Mahi, what was the Paris? Tell you what in the Braisa. Moiser Truma, the extra of the Truma, Mahai Oisiba. So again, you had Truma Salishka, and now you already used up, it's already Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and you didn't use up, you have extra funds in the Truma Salishka, and the Truma, the box that they took off. So what did they do with it? So, Loichin Peiris Bezol, what they used to do is, they would buy produce cheap, they would sell it at a high price. And that money they would use for the Kaitz HaMizbeach, which was when the Mizbeach was not being used. Now, Rashi points out that the principle was for the Klisharas, like Rabbi Shmuel said. It's just that the Moisa Peiris, that was the extra leftover of the produce, that was the Kaitz HaMizbeach. This is what we learned. Moisa Peiris. So again, the Peiris itself was the principle. First, you would, whatever you took to buy, you would use for the Klisharas. The extra was the Kaitz HaMizbeach. It says the Gemara, what does it mean that both of them did not agree to Peiris? What does it mean they weren't Maida? Did not learn the Mishnah Masechta Shkalim that Rabbi Kiva disagrees with Rabbi Shmuel, and he doesn't agree that you should be making business with hektish funds. So there's no such concept of Moisa Peiris because there's no Peiris. They weren't buying anything. Mishnah teaches Moisa shiur alishka ma'ayisim. What they do with the leftovers of the remnants of the lishka. So the shiur lishka, which is what's left over after you take up the truma, and that was used for certain things. And then after using for those certain things, now there's still leftovers in the shiur lishka. What would they do with that? So the first opinion says loichem and yenes shmon b'salasas. They would buy wines and oils and flowers, paschal hektish, and they would make business with it, and the profit would go to hektish. That's the Rabbi Shmuel. That's why he said there's such a concept of Moisa Peiris. But Rabbi Kiva may disagree. There's no aim stack mishal hektish. You don't do business with hektish funds. And after Bishal, the same thing is regarding paupers. So the Gemara says Bishal hektish might tell me, what's the reason why by hektish you don't do business? Because in these you're not going to take a leftovers by a wealthy chasna and you say, okay, let's go sell the kishke. You know what I'm saying? So let's take a break to chasna. No. You don't have a place of poverty and a place of opulence. So we're not making business with extra funds. Now, B'Shalani might tell me, what's the reason why paupers, when you collected tzedakah for poor people, are you not allowed to do business? You have an opportunity. You own a big organization for aniyim in Petach Tikva or whatever, and you want to go ahead and make a business deal. Why can't you do that? There's the Misramalu Anya, because maybe a poor person might be knocking on the organization's door, but like the Mesa, you're not going to have what to give them because we just invested your monies to go ahead and make more money. So therefore, we keep it disagreed. So again, according to him, there is no such concept of Meister Peiris, because there is no Peiris. And again, we just showed that there is a Tana that says like Rav, that the Kli Sharis were brought from the Trumas Halishko, at least what's called the Meister Trumas Halishko, although there are other opinions regarding where it's brought from. I think it's anything.